Chapter 4 The Shopping District. X-I Zumavoid. X was proud of the hermits. The shopping district was coming together nicely. It had been a few days, and the hermits had all managed to gather elytras. Now they were all outlining plots in stone of where they wanted to put their shops. Of course, X didn't want there to be a land rush, so he laid down a fair rule. 1 diamond block for a 10 by 10 plot of land. That is where X was now, standing at the center of the island, admiring the diamond block pile as he listened to the hermits outline their plots of land in stone and mumble to themselves about what shops they were going to build. "Oi, X!" It was Cleo, one of his most loyal friends and always a welcome voice to hear approach. "Can you hear it, Cleo?" responded X. "There's no better sound than the sound of commercial progress." "Careful, X. You might start drooling looking at that diamond pile any longer." They both knew that Cleo was only half joking. "We better figure out a way to put these diamonds to use, though." X didn't like the idea of having large piles of money just lying around. "Have you seen the newbies recently?" "Can't say I have. Why do you ask?" "I haven't seen them since the fight with that thing, and I wanted to check in on them." X was nervous now. He didn't want Cleo talking about that monster out loud, should she start a panic. But he also didn't want Cleo thinking that he was trying to keep something from her. He would never keep anything from her. "They're probably just in the nether or something," X said, trying to get the conversation away from the monster. "Probably. They sure do everything together." X knew that Light and Beth were hopelessly in love with each other, but he didn't want to go around starting rumors. "That's what good friends do," X simply responded. "But the whole point of them being here is that they should be hanging out with all of us. Give them time, Cleo. They'll warm up to us. It took all of us time to break out of our shells when we were new here. You're right, X. I just wanted them to have fun here." "They will. We're a fun crowd. In the meantime, I need you to keep me informed about any mysterious sightings." X knew that it was a risk talking about the monster again. What was it called? Of course, the Abyss. But he also needed Cleo's eyes and ears. He had to handle things quickly and quietly before it hurt someone else. Grian. Grian was broke. That much he knew. He stood on the edge of a small lake, gazing at his 10 by 10 plot of land, unsure of what to build. He didn't have that many materials on him, but whatever he built, he wanted it to be water-themed. It was then he got an idea. A raft. It was perfect. He began to place and fasten wood. A poor man's raft. That's how he would start out, along with a small dock to allow people to board. And on this raft he placed 3 barrels and stocked them with things he had an abundance of. Leather, stone, and quartz. He had no use for these items, and they could be a pain to get in large quantities, especially this early on. He charged a reasonable 1 diamond per 1 good price, with a minimum buy of 64 items. The hermit economy was built on diamonds, and he was determined not to be at the bottom of the economic ladder. As he made more money, he would buy more land and expand his poor man's raft into a rich man's barge. His build was small and shabby, so it was completed very quickly, all for the better. He needed to get to work. He had much bigger aspirations this time, and he was about to unveil them to the world. Boss Beth. Beth had lost count of how much time she and Light had spent in the nether. Could have been a day, could have been a week. There was no sun in the nether, and clocks didn't work. Same with compasses. In the nether, they all went haywire. The nether didn't have a sky, it had a roof. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all covered with netherrack, a smooth substance that absorbed the heat well. Lava was the only source of light in the realm. Fortunately, it flowed everywhere from random spots in the ceiling. There were also deep oceans of the stuff covering huge portions of the floor. That's why Beth and Light only stuck to the cliffs. Fortunately, the netherrack was easy to mine through, and they had spotted a crimson forest right out of the portal. It was just taking them longer than expected to get to it. Light kept her pockets open for all the wood she was going to carry, which was fine because Beth was the one who came prepared for a fight. Sword, axe, shield, drinkable fire resistance potion for herself, splashable fire resistance potion for Light. It was all there. Light was doing the mining since she felt bad making Beth do more work than she had to. Beth didn't mind. She loved seeing Light happy. Of course, what would make her the happiest was getting out of this fiery hellscape. Crimson forests were dangerous. Their trees had beautiful red wood, and even the wart fungus that extended from the branches had its uses. However, the population there was less than friendly. Piglins roamed the forest. Of course, they roamed all the nether and would leave anyone alone who was wearing gold. They respected gold. Their bulky humanoid bodies sometimes wore parts of golden armor. Despite their angry pig faces and their snouts always flaring up in a huff, they were mostly reasonable creatures. The same could be said for the zombified piglins. They were like normal piglins, only most of their clothes and parts of their flesh had rotted away, revealing their bones. However, unlike zombies in the overworld, they would not attack on sight. They worked as a hive mind. If you simply left them alone, they would leave you alone. What you really had to worry about in the Crimson Forest were the hoglins. You would be forgiven for thinking the hoglins were just really ugly pigs, but that's not the case. Hoglins were extremely hostile. They had longer snouts than normal pigs, with long, sharp tusks, and would attack on sight. The babies were the worst. The baby hoglins were smaller, faster, and meaner. That was why Beth was here. She was to protect her precious Princess Light from the monsters. Was that too much? Beth thought that might be too much. It was the perfect time to tell Light the truth. They were alone in a narrow tunnel together, however the netherrack was absorbing the heat and cooking them alive, so maybe it wasn't the best time. Or was she just making excuses not to do it? She had the whole year to tell Light. She could wait a little longer. "I did it!" Light shouted, breaking Beth's inner thoughts. Sure enough, she had done it. She had broken through the mountain and emerged on the other side, on the edge of a crimson forest. Light was so excited she forgot how terrified of this entire realm she was, and joyously skipped over to the closest tree. Beth loved seeing her so happy. Although she wasn't a builder, she concluded that the crimson wood of the nether was a beautiful shade of red. Moving quickly, Beth took up a position at Light's back. She held up her axe and shield as she looked around. Light had reason to be concerned. They were in an exposed position. To her left was a 30-meter drop into a lava ocean. Not to mention they were open to any sort of flying ghast attack. But she couldn't worry about those screaming balloons of death at the moment, because she heard the oinks and snorts of angry piglins nearby. They shouldn't be hostile at this time, but the ambience only served to heighten the tension. Light moved on to her third tree. She had an enchanted diamond axe that she got from Impulse, so the chopping was going faster than expected. Beth watched her swing her axe just for a moment. It was boiling and they were surrounded by monsters, but Beth couldn't stop thinking about Light and how beautiful she looked. Beth turned her back for a second, but when she turned around, she was surprised to see a wither skeleton walking by her. The wither skeletons were formidable creatures. They were taller than normal skeletons and their bones were black. However, instead of bows, they wielded stone swords. Their eyes were supposed to be hollow black pits, but this one's eyes were glowing white. Beth raised her sword. One cut from a wither skeleton's blade would taint your blood with the withering effect, attacking your muscles and decaying them for a period of time. She watched and waited for the wither skeleton to make its first move, but it never came. The skeleton walked past her without a care in the world. Beth was confused. This was new behavior? She then connected the dots. The glowing white eyes, the odd behavior. The abyss was here. They needed to leave. Now. Beth couldn't afford to put Light in danger, but she also didn't want to panic. First, she wanted to establish where the skeleton was going. She quietly moved behind another tree and followed the skeleton. Just as she had theorized, there was an entrance to a nether fortress nearby which the skeleton walked into. The nether fortresses were massive expanses that stuck out of the lava and expanded inside the nether walls. They had enormous platforms that had crumbled away over the years. The fortresses were filled with treasures, but also filled with wither skeletons, making them extremely dangerous. Beth had to explore it. She needed to find out what the abyss really was, but she didn't want to worry Light. "All done," Light said in the distance. Beth had to get back to her before Light noticed her looking at the fortress, but it was too late. "Ooh, another fortress," Light said excitedly. "You're under-geared," Beth said, desperate for any excuse to keep Light away. "You can trade anything you want with another hermit." "I don't want to be so scared of everything anymore. I want to face my fears." Beth almost found it funny how Light was able to face her fears, meanwhile Beth was too much of a coward to ask her out. She knew it was a terrible idea to let Light into that fortress regardless, so she decided to tell her the truth. "I think the skeletons in there are under the control of the abyss," Beth said. Light looked terrified. Beth didn't like seeing her scared this way, but it was the only way to keep her safe. "You go, I'll investigate." "No, you can't go alone." "I'll be careful, they won't even see me." "I don't want you taking that chance. I couldn't bear to think anything bad happened to you." "It'll be okay, I won't let them hurt me or anyone else." Light still looked nervous, but also determined. "Well, if that's the case, you won't mind me coming with you." Beth opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Light was incredibly stubborn when she wanted to be, and there was no changing her mind once it was made up on a topic like this. "Fine," Beth said, worried that her tone was wrong and sounded uninviting. She didn't want Light to think it was her who was the problem, but rather her safety. "Just stay behind me." Light looked excited, but also terrified. Together they would journey where many hermits had never gone before. Except this time, neither of them would be alone. Night Light. Light was scared out of her mind. Even though Beth was always there for her, she was still entering into a lair of a monster that had almost fed off them both. Even though death was just a formality to their kind, it still hurt, and she wanted to avoid it as much as possible. They wandered through the heated halls of the fortress. A path of nether bricks showed them the way. Those loose bricks shuffled under their feet. This fortress was nothing special except for a series of hallways. There were always a few rooms of note, mostly rooms with stairs that would just take you to another level of hallways. Then, of course, you had the rooms with the mysterious wells with only a small speck of lava inside of it, acting as the room's only light source. Light was doing her part. She lined the start and end of every hallway with a row of cobblestone, making the opening too short for the wither skeletons to pass through. That wouldn't stop the zombified piglins, though, if they ever got mad. She was also placing a line of torches on the ground to mark their path. The other creatures of the world weren't quite intelligent enough to notice the changes the hermits would make to their world. The team quietly traversed the hallways without seeing a single enemy. It was only after 15 minutes of exploring did they start to hear voices.
"Feed me,"
the first voice said. It was the abyss. That much was obvious. Then the second voice spoke. "Yes, sir." The second voice replied. It was gruff yet intelligent sounding, like it was already 12 steps ahead of a game no one knew they were playing. Light wanted to see into the room, but there was no good vantage point that didn't come without the risk of being spotted. Fortunately, Beth had her sword. She angled the blade so that they could see the fuzzy reflections of what was going on in the room. They could see the abyss, as well as a few wither skeletons gathered around the lava well along with the person responsible for the mysterious new voice. The new guy was definitely not a hermit they'd ever seen before, but also definitely a human. He had messy pink hair and a pig masquerade mask covering his face. Behind him was a long, flowing red cape connected by 2 straps to his shoulder pads, so it could be easily removed during battle. His armor glinted purple, the unmistakable look of fully enchanted netherite armor. Whoever he was a professional. The mysterious figure dragged a cow in on a lead. The cow looked terrified. Everyone in and outside the room knew what was about to happen to it. The abyss extended one of its tentacles and impaled the cow through its stomach, holding it up like a trophy. The cow let out a pain as the creature swung it through the air. The cow suddenly became engulfed in growths, emerging from the end of the abyss's tentacle and forming a cocoon around the cow. Eventually, the cocoon burst open and only a pile of bones fell out. Light couldn't hide her horror. She had to cover her own mouth to keep herself from screaming. She never ate meat out of principle, and she had no problem with the people who did. But what this thing had just done was downright barbaric. What was worse still was that the abyss started to grow. Its mass expanded by only a few centimeters, and you'd be forgiven for not noticing it, but it grew, and then it spoke.
"I hunger more."
"All in good time, my lord," the man said. "For now we need to build your strength. Once you have enough power to take down a hermit, you will be able to control all the monsters in the world." Light gasped, this time unable to hide her fear. Beth looked terrified, but no one else seemed to notice. The 2 men continued talking. "We'll hide you in the nether for now," said the mysterious figure. "We want the hermits to get comfortable, complacent. Let the few who know about us ring the panic alarm. Then we strike when they are at their most relaxed."
"Then we feast?"
"Then we feast." The mysterious figure let out an evil chuckle. No one else laughed. None of the monsters laughed. No one else seemed to understand. All except for him. Beth motioned to Light that they needed to get out of there. Light nodded in agreement. This was no longer a fun adventure with the girl she liked. It was life and death. Even though death was just a formality to the hermit, something about the abyss made it seem like death by its tentacles would be more painful and more permanent than usual. "Hello all!" A baritone and surprising voice pierced the quiet chatter of the schemers, loud enough for anyone to hear those words across any realm. Beth and Light looked further down the hall to see Scar walking toward them, pulling a heavy cart lined with small glowing crystals. "I bring you the opportunity of a lifetime! Crystals galore!" Light was struck with terror. All she could do was hope the enemies of the fortress hadn't heard Scar shouting. She, in fact, was not so lucky. The abyss burst through the wall behind them and sent out a massive array of tentacles at Scar. Scar screamed in terror. He dove behind his cart and the monster ended up impaling it. He threw the cart aside and smashed it against the wall. It then roared in a fury as it pushed itself over Light and Beth to pounce on Scar. Just as the creature was about to wrap its tentacles around Scar, a piece of TNT flew at the monster's back and exploded, causing it to reel in pain. Down another hallway, through the smoke of the explosion, emerged Doc M77. His goat horns emerged first, then his muscled green skin covered by his ripped sleeveless lab coat. His cybernetic left eye narrowed on the beast. Doc only spoke one word in his Swedish accent. "Run." He didn't have to tell them twice. Scar was the first to skedaddle. He had just wanted to sucker the newbies into buying his garbage wizard health crystals, not get impaled by an eldritch horror. Light and Beth flew past Doc next, holding hands as they ran back to the portal. Light looked back for a moment to see Doc extend a series of mechanical arms from his back and begin an epic battle with the abyss. She was worried about Doc, but knew that with someone as smart and as strong as him, she would just get in the way if she tried to help. The terrified trio ran out of the fortress and back into the Crimson Forest, only to find their path blocked by 6 wither skeletons and the mysterious figure in the pig mask. The figure once again spoke. "You have no idea what you walked into." "We didn't see anything," Light tried to reason. "If you let us go, we'll never bother you again." He simply smiled. Was it amusement or pity for her naivete? "There can be no witnesses, and I'm going to enjoy killing you first." Beth let go of her hand. Light had never felt more alone. Was Beth going to... She couldn't even complete the thought. Beth lunged forward and used the flat part of her blade to knock the self-assured man on his back as he let out a cry of pain. This triggered the skeletons to act, and they all ran at Beth. A skeleton swung its sword at Beth, but she backed out of the way and kicked it in the ribs to knock it to the ground. Another one tried to attack her from behind, but she elbowed it in the skull, causing its head to spin around on its neck and fall off. Her blade clashed with the third skeleton, but she managed to uppercut it and knock its head off. The last 2 skeletons attacked her at the same time, but she dodged their twin strikes and whirled around with her sword in her hands, cutting skeletons in half. Light noticed Scar quickly gathering up the skulls of the fallen wither skeletons. How could he be thinking about valuable items at a time like this? The mysterious man recovered, furious that someone was allowed to get the jump on him. He drew his enchanted netherite sword and his enchanted netherite axe, the Orphan Obliterator and the Axe of Peace. He rushed into battle against the distracted Beth and quickly kneed her in the stomach. Beth let out a gasp for air. The man grabbed her by the back of her collar and threw her headfirst into a tree. Beth tried to hold up her sword, but the man kicked it out of her hand. "Who are you?" was all Beth could say, bleeding out of her mouth and probably with a concussion. "I am many things. An anarchist, a murderer, a warrior, but most importantly, I am Technoblade." Everyone froze. Technoblade was the most unstable and dangerous anarchist in history. The legends say he went from land to root out any form of organized government. But what was he doing here? Technoblade was a terrifying figure as he loomed over Beth, ready to strike the killing blow. That was until Doc flew through the air and knocked Technoblade aside. Technoblade let out a yelp as the goat man landed on top of him. Doc wasn't looking so good. His machine arms had all been ripped out, flickering with electricity. He twitched as the visible cuts on his arms and legs bled. The monster crawled out of the nether fortress and wrapped two of its tentacles around Doc.
Feed me.
Beth took her a moment to run back over to Light, and she used the spare obsidian she had to start making a new portal right there and then. She lined the obsidian out as a circle on the ground before pulling out a flint and steel and sparking the portal open. Scar wasted no time in jumping through the portal. It could have been night in an open field with 1,000 creepers. Anywhere was better than there. Beth moved to grab Light's wrist, but Light froze. "What about Doc?" she asked. "Go!" Doc shouted as he pulled out one last piece of TNT and lit it. "Don't look back!" Doc threw the TNT with all of his might. Beth quickly dragged Light down into the portal. The last thing either of them saw was the abyss extending its tentacles over Doc, and the last thing they heard was his agonizing screams as he was swallowed whole and his bones spat out on the ground. XI Zumavoid. X was proud of his hermits. The frames of the shops started to go up. Soon the hermit economy would be up and running. His thoughts of peace and prosperity were interrupted by a rather rude nether portal that materialized in the sky. He heard a familiar series of screams emanating from it before Scar fell out of the portal and landed on top of X. The wind was knocked out of X. He couldn't move under Scar's weight. He could feel Scar's magic crystals poking him through his pockets and into X's back. Or at least he hoped those were crystals. Moments later, the two newbies, Light and Beth, fell out of the portal and landed next to them. After a moment, the portal exploded behind them and the pieces of obsidian holding it together blew across the island. X shoved Scar off of him. A crowd had begun to gather around because of the commotion. X needed to make sure the intense exit went smoothly. He cracked a smile, not that anyone could see it through his gas mask. "Ah, hasty nether exit, I see." The hermit crowd laughed. They could all relate to making an emergency portal or two after accidentally backing into a zombified piglin. The newbies weren't laughing, though. Even the normally jovial Scar looked shaken up. X started to get nervous. Surely their nether trip couldn't have been that bad. Eventually, Light spoke. "Doc's dead." X breathed a sigh of relief. It was only death. Then surely it would be only a minor inconvenience. "Well, that's a relief," X proclaimed. "I never expected Doc to go down to a few piglins, but I guess there's the first time for everything." The hermits laughed once more. He managed to calm their nerves and the crowd looked about ready to disperse. That was until Beth spoke up. "That thing was there. It chewed him up and spit him out. All that was left were his bones." Beth seemed terrified, but what other emotion was X picking up? Was that anger? Anger towards him? She was spiraling. She could whip the hermits into a panic if X didn't choose his next words carefully. "Death is just a formality to us hermits, Beth. I'm sure Doc will be along at any moment." He looked around praying that Doc hadn't slept in a bed recently so that he would materialize next to them and prove everything would be fine. After a few moments of stressed silence, this proved not to be the case. X turned to Cleo. "Cleo, check Doc's base." Cleo nodded. She flew off with a single rocket into the air and began to glide away on her brand new elytra. X needed to tamp down the mood while she was gone. "I'm sure Doc will wake up in his base and be completely fine," X said. "I know first trips to the nether can be scary, but—" "Don't you patronize me!" Beth cut him off. She had mistaken his reassurance for condescension. "I've been to the nether before. You know what I've never seen there? Eldritch abominations with the ability to control an army of monsters and Technoblade." The crowd began to murmur at the mention of the famous anarchist. Some thought he was just a myth. Even X was caught off guard by this revelation. "Could you be mistaken?" X regretted the question immediately, but it was all he could think to say. As he suspected, it only aggravated Beth even more. "His sword felt real when it tasted my blood. His hate felt real when he threw me into a tree. And he's working for the abyss. And you know what else, X? He's feeding it, and it's getting bigger." Before, their adventures had been safe and predictable, but now this was something new entirely. X didn't want to admit it, but he was scared stiff. Beth continued. "You treated this thing like it was a normal monster, and look what happened. One of our members is dead. We don't know where he is." It was X's only response. The last grasp of hope he had to keep order. Right on cue, Cleo flew back into the group. Her expression carried bad news. X? Doc's not in his base. I checked everywhere, but I couldn't find him. There was nothing left. X felt the air leave his lungs and his soul left his body. He was in it now. Beth was on a roll, so she kept going. I say it's about time we had a real leader. Someone who can handle this crisis and stop the abyss. The hermits shouted in agreement, saddened and enraged that they would never see Doc M77 ever again. Scar for mayor, B-Dub shouted from the crowd. Mumbo for mayor, shouted Grian. Stress for mayor, shouted Iskal. X looked at Cleo to see how she felt. Her opinion was the only one that mattered to him right now. Cleo simply looked down and bit her tongue. X didn't know whether to feel relieved or angry. He had failed them, and he felt awful. One of their own kind was at the very least missing in action, and it was partially his fault for leading passively. Even if he tried to rally the hermits now, he knew they would never do so around him. With regret in his heart, he conceded to their wishes. Very well, he shouted over the crowd, trying to tamp down the angry mob. We will have a 2-week campaign, and there will be an election for the mayor of the hermits. We will see who can lead us to the future and deal with this crisis. The hermits shouted in approval. Not cheered, but shouted. They were still hurt and angry. X could understand. They would need time to process their grief. For now, X would go quiet. He wouldn't run for mayor. That required a trust which had just been broken. Instead, he would begin his own investigation. Quietly. In the background. While everyone was distracted with the campaign, he was going to find out what the abyss was and how to destroy it.